The Galactic Federation had been at war for 300 years. It was a messy, brutal conflict between the Krell Empire and the Alarian Alliance. Stars were dying, planets were being turned into glass, and billions of lives were lost. In the middle of all this chaos sat a small, blue planet called Earth. The humans were late to the party. They had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. When they looked at the galaxy and saw the fire of 1,000 wars, they did something no other species had ever done. They didn't join a side. They didn't ask for protection. They simply sent a broadcast to every frequency in the galaxy. We are the humans. We don't want your territory. We don't want your technology. Please, just leave us alone. We have enough problems at home. For 2 centuries, the galaxy did exactly that. To the Krell, humans were soft. To the Alarians, humans were primitive. Earth was ignored. It was a neutral zone that no one bothered to map. But war changes people. And after 300 years, the Krell Empire was getting desperate. They needed resources. They needed a staging ground to attack the Alarian Heartworld, and their maps showed a small, unprotected system with a sun and 8 planets. Commander Varkas of the Krell 7th Fleet stood on the bridge of his massive dreadnought, the Starcracker. He looked at the holographic image of Earth. "Report," Varkas barked. "Sir," his science officer replied. "The planet is inhabited by a type, one civilization. They have no planetary shields. Their weapons are based on chemical explosions and kinetic slugs. They are primitive." Varkas laughed, a sound like grinding rocks. "And their military? They don't have a global military, sir. Just divided nations. They haven't had a major war in 80 years. They spend their time making movies and internet memes. They are weak." Varkas pointed his claw at Earth. "Tell the fleet to move in. We will take their water, their minerals, and turn their population into workers. We don't need to negotiate. Just knock on their door and walk in." On Earth, it was a quiet Tuesday. In New York, London, Tokyo, and Islamabad, people were going to work. They were drinking coffee, complaining about traffic, and living their lives. They had forgotten about the Galactic War because they had decided to focus on peace. Suddenly, the sky didn't turn blue anymore. It turned silver. Thousands of Krell ships exited hyperspace at once, blocking the sun. The Great Knock had arrived. In a secret underground bunker in the mountains of Nevada, an old man named General Miller looked at a radar screen that was glowing bright red. He wasn't panicked. He didn't scream. He simply sighed and picked up a black telephone. "Is it them?" a voice asked on the other end. It was the president. "Yes, sir," Miller said, his voice cold as ice. "The Krell. They didn't listen to the broadcast." "Are we ready?" the president asked. Miller looked at a secondary screen. It showed thousands of hidden silos beneath the Earth's crust, deep under the oceans, and even hidden on the dark side of the moon. These weren't silos for nuclear bombs. They were something much, much worse. "Sir," Miller replied, "we've been waiting for someone to be stupid enough to try this for 200 years. We are more than ready." Above the Earth, Commander Varkas sent a message to the planet. "People of Earth, I am Commander Varkas. Your world is now a colony of the Krell Empire. Surrender now, and we will be merciful. Resist, and we will erase you." He waited for a plea for mercy. He waited for a white flag. Instead, he got a 2-word reply from the surface of Earth. It was simple English. "Wrong door." Suddenly, the moon, the Earth's natural satellite, began to shift. To the Krell's horror, the surface of the moon started to slide away, like giant metal doors. From the darkness inside the moon, a weapon the size of a city began to glow with a terrifying golden light. The Krell had spent 300 years fighting a war. They thought they knew everything about combat. They were about to find out that when humans stay out of a war, it's not because they are afraid. It's because they are the only ones who know how to end it. Commander Varkas gripped the edge of his command chair. On his view screen, the moon was no longer just a gray, lifeless rock. Massive tectonic plates made of high-grade titanium and reinforced carbon were sliding back into the lunar crust. "Sir," the science officer screamed, his voice cracking with fear. "The moon. It's not a satellite. It's a shell. There is a massive energy signature coming from the core, deep inside the moon. The Lunar Defense Array, LDA, had come online. For 2 centuries, While the rest of the galaxy fought with flashy lasers and plasma cannons, Earth's scientists had perfected something much more terrifying. Magnetic acceleration. Target the lead dreadnought. General Miller's voice echoed through the secret lunar base. Fire the railgun. There was no sound in the vacuum of space, but the visual was haunting. A slug of solid tungsten, the size of a skyscraper, was launched from the moon's surface at 5% the speed of light. It didn't glow. It didn't hum. It was just a silent, invisible messenger of death. The Starcracker, the Krell's pride and joy, didn't even have time to raise its shields to maximum. The tungsten slug hit the ship's nose, traveled through the engine room, and exited out the back before the crew even realized they were under attack. A second later, the dreadnought erupted into a ball of violet fire. The invincible Commander Varkas was gone in a heartbeat. "Impossible," shouted the second-in-command on a nearby Krell destroyer. "They just destroyed a dreadnought with a piece of metal. Reroute all power to shields. Attack. Destroy that rock." The Krell fleet, thousands of ships strong, turned their guns away from Earth and toward the moon. They unleashed a storm of plasma fire. The surface of the moon was hit by enough energy to melt a continent, but the humans had planned for this. The moon wasn't just a gun. It was a fortress. Beneath the surface, giant cooling systems pumped liquid nitrogen to keep the base from melting. The humans had used the moon's own mass as a shield. While the Krell were busy shooting at the moon, something was happening on Earth. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic, and the Indian Ocean, massive cargo ships that had been sitting idle for years began to change. Their flat decks slid open, revealing thousands of vertical launch tubes. These weren't missiles. They were drones. Millions of small, fast, and incredibly agile Hornet drones swarmed into the sky. They were controlled by Earth's most advanced AI, trained by billions of hours of human flight sim data. They didn't need pilots. They didn't feel fear. On the Krell ships, the radar screens became a solid wall of red. "They are launching insects," a Krell pilot laughed over the comms. "Our shields can handle small craft." He was wrong. The drones weren't trying to shoot the ships. They were kamikaze units. Each drone was carrying a small payload of antimatter dust. The drones hit the Krell shields like rain on a window. One drone did nothing. 10 drones did nothing. But 1,000 drones hitting the same spot on a shield caused the energy field to collapse. On the ground in Islamabad, a young girl looked up at the sky. The silver ships were falling. They looked like shooting stars, trailing smoke and fire. The peaceful humans were no longer peaceful. The world's factories, which had been making cars and smartphones, were now receiving a single digital command from General Miller: Protocol Fenris. In less than an hour, the Krell went from being invaders to being prey. They had knocked on the door of a house they thought was empty, only to find a dragon sleeping inside. The Krell Vice Admiral, now in charge of the crumbling fleet, sent a desperate message to his home planet: "Send reinforcements. The humans. They don't fight like the Alarians. They don't use tactics. They use overwhelming, brutal mass. They are." His message was cut short as a human rail fighter. A jet designed for space combat sliced through his bridge. The first battle of Earth was over in 3 hours. The debris of the Krell fleet now formed a new, shining ring around the planet. General Miller sat back in his chair and sighed. He looked at the president on the screen. "The immediate threat is gone, sir," Miller said. "And the long-term threat?" the president asked. Miller narrowed his eyes. "The Krell Empire will send more, and the Alarians will come to see who destroyed the Krell. The galaxy knows we are here now. Then what do we do?" Miller stood up, straightening his uniform. "We stayed out of their war for 200 years. If they want to bring the war to our door, then we will take the war to their doorstep. Tell the shipyards to start the Excalibur project. It's time Earth went on the offensive. Tell the shipyards." The galaxy had spent 300 years in a stalemate. Earth was about to end it in a week. For 2 centuries, the world had lived in a fake peace. While the average person was buying groceries and watching sports, the brightest minds of Earth, NASA, CERN, and secret military labs had been working on a single goal: total planetary security. They knew that one day, the Galactic War would reach them. They didn't just build a few ships. They turned the entire Earth into a giant factory. In the deep forests of Siberia and the vast deserts of Australia, hidden hangar doors began to open. These weren't just hangars. They were gravity wells. Using technology they had secretly stolen from crashed Krell probes years ago, humans had learned to manipulate mass. From the ground, the people of Earth watched as the Excalibur-class ships rose into the sky. Unlike the elegant, bird-like ships of the Alarians or the jagged, spiked ships of the Krell, human ships were ugly. They were giant, black boxes of reinforced steel. They looked like flying bricks, but they weren't built for beauty. They were built for total war. "They're not ships," a Krell survivor whispered from his escape pod as he watched them rise. "They are flying fortresses." On the bridge of the flagship, the UES Retribution, General Miller stood next to Admiral Sarah Chen. "The Alarian Alliance is sending an envoy," Admiral Chen reported. "They saw what we did to the Krell. They want to invite us to their alliance. They say they can offer us protection." And, quote, Miller let out a dry laugh. "Protection? We just wiped out the fleet they couldn't beat for 50 years. Tell the Alarians we aren't interested in their clubs." "And the Krell?" "The Krell are regrouping at their nearest outpost, Station K9, Miller said, pointing to a holographic map. "They think we are going to sit here and wait for them to come back with a bigger fleet. They think we are scared." He turned to the communications officer. "Send a message to the whole planet. Put it on every TV, every phone, and every radio." A few seconds later, the face of General Miller appeared on every screen across the globe. "People of Earth," Miller said, his voice calm but firm. "The Great Silence is over. We tried to stay out of their war. We asked for peace, and they answered with fire. Now, we answer with Earth. We are not just defending our home anymore. We are going to make sure no one ever dares to knock on our door again." The world didn't panic. Instead, something amazing happened. In every city, people stopped what they were doing. Construction workers started building parts for more ships. Coders began writing new targeting software for the drone swarms. Doctors began preparing for space medical duty. The divided nations of Earth disappeared in a single day. There were no Americans, no Pakistanis, no Chinese, no Russians. There were only humans. In the Krell High Command, the Emperor was furious. How? How did they win? "Their technology is strange, Majesty," his advisor said. "They don't use energy shields like ours. They use reactive armor that explodes outward to stop our lasers. And their weapons. They don't use plasma. They use nuclear-tipped harpoons. They don't just shoot you. They hook onto your ship and blow it up from the inside." The Emperor slammed his fist on the table. "I want Earth burned to ashes. Send the Grand Armada. 50,000 ships." But the Krell Emperor was too late. While the Krell were preparing their armada, the UES Retribution and its fleet of black bricks had already jumped into hyperspace. They weren't heading for a defensive line. They were heading straight for the Krell's main mining colony. The humans had a saying, "The best defense is a good offense." When the human fleet exited hyperspace at the Krell colony, the Krell defenders were shocked. Usually, in galactic war, you send a message first. You demand a surrender. You follow protocols of war. The humans didn't send a message. As soon as they arrived, Admiral Chen gave the order. "Unleash the dogs." Thousands of human drop pods screamed through the atmosphere of the Krell colony. Inside were the Terran Marines. They didn't have high-tech gravity boots or cloaking devices. They had heavy power armor, massive shotguns, and a lot of pent-up anger. The Krell soldiers who relied on long-range lasers were terrified when the humans landed right on top of them. The humans didn't hide. They ran forward, shouting war cries that hadn't been heard in the galaxy for eons. In just 6 hours, the colony was under human control. General Miller looked at the captured Krell commander. "We told you to leave us alone," Miller said. The Krell commander trembled. You are monsters. This is not how war is fought." Miller leaned in close. "You're right. This isn't a war. This is a lesson. And we're just getting started with Part 1. While the Krell Empire was reeling from the loss of their mining colony, the Alarian Alliance, the peacekeepers of the galaxy, watched from the shadows. The Alarians were tall, elegant beings with blue skin and 4 eyes. They prided themselves on their wisdom and their ancient technology. In the Alarian High Council, the atmosphere was tense. "These humans," the High Archon said, looking at a recording of the human Marines taking the Krell base. "They fight with a primitive ferocity. They don't use tactics. They use momentum. They are dangerous, another counselor added. If they defeat the Krell, they won't stop there. We must bring them under our control before they become the new conquerors. The Alarians decided to play a dangerous game. They sent their most beautiful ship, the Starlight Symphony, to meet the human fleet. It wasn't armed with cannons, it was armed with diplomats. On the bridge of the UES Retribution, Admiral Chen watched the Alarian ship approach. They're broadcasting peace codes, Admiral. They want to talk. Let them in, Miller said. But keep the railguns hot. I don't trust anyone who wears that much silk in a war zone. The Alarian ambassador, a being named Valerius, stepped onto the human ship. He looked around at the cold gray steel and the exposed wires of the Retribution. He felt a sense of disgust. To him, this ship looked like a factory, not a vessel of war. General Miller, Valerius said, bowing slightly. I come from the Alarian Alliance. We congratulate you on your victory against the Krell. They were a stain on this galaxy. Get to the point, Miller said, not moving from his chair. Valerius smiled. We wish to offer Earth a seat on our council. We will give you access to our shields, our medicine, and our star charts. In return, all we ask is that you hand over your magnetic acceleration technology and place your fleet under Alarian command. The bridge went silent. Admiral Chen looked like she was about to explode. General Miller stood up slowly. He walked over to the Alarian ambassador and looked him in all four of his eyes. You want our guns, Miller said, and you want our boys and girls to fight your war for you while you sit in your pretty towers. It is for the greater good of the galaxy, Valerius replied smoothly. You are new to this. You don't understand the complexities of... Miller cut him off. Let me tell you what I understand. For 300 years, you and the Krell have been burning planets. You've had the technology to end this war for a century, but you didn't. You liked the stalemate. It kept you in power. That is an oversimplification, Valerius snapped. No, Miller said. It's the truth. You saw us as a buffer zone. You let the Krell attack us to see how strong we were, and now that you see we have teeth, you want to put a leash on us. Miller turned to the view screen, showing the millions of stars. The answer is no. We aren't joining your alliance, and we aren't giving you our tech. Valerius narrowed his eyes. You are making a mistake, General. The Krell Armada is 10 times the size of what you faced. Without our shields, your steel bricks will be melted into slag. You cannot survive alone. We aren't alone, Miller replied. We have 7 billion people who are finally angry about the same thing. Tell your council to stay out of our way. We're going to finish the Krell, and then we're going to have a long talk with you about peace. The Alarian ambassador left the ship in a huff. As the Starlight Symphony jumped away, Admiral Chen turned to Miller. You know they're going to leak our coordinates to the Krell now, right? She asked. I'm counting on it, Miller said. The Krell are regrouping at the Onyx Nebula. They're building a planet-killer weapon. They think they're hiding. If the Alarians tell them where we are, the Krell will come out to play. And if they bring that planet killer, Miller looked at a small black suitcase on his desk. Inside was the Alpha Omega code. It was a project Earth had worked on in total secrecy, a way to use a star's own gravity as a weapon. Then we show them why Earth stayed out of the war, Miller said. Because once we're in, we don't stop until the other side doesn't exist anymore. On Earth, the factories were now running 24/7. The first star bombers were rolling off the assembly lines. The quiet neighbor was gone. The galaxy's nightmare had just begun. The Onyx Nebula was a graveyard of stars, a thick cloud of purple and black dust that scrambled most sensors. Deep inside this cloud, the Krell Empire had hidden their ultimate project, the Sun Eater. It wasn't a ship. It was a massive, hollowed-out moon covered in thousands of thrusters and a single, terrifying lens. Its purpose was simple. Fire a beam of dark energy into a star, causing it to go supernova instantly. The weapon is 90% charged, the Krell High Priest reported to the Emperor. In 6 hours, we jump to the Sol system. Earth's sun will explode, and their little blue marble will turn into dust. The Krell Emperor smiled. And the Alarians? The Alarians have, accidentally, leaked the humans' current location to us, just as we expected. The human fleet is heading toward our decoy base at the edge of the nebula. They are walking into a trap. But the Krell made one fatal mistake. They assumed humans relied on the same sensors as everyone else. While the Krell used LiDAR and grav sensors, the humans had reached back into their history books. They used old-school radio astronomy and thermal triangulation. They didn't look for the ships. They looked for the heat the ships produced in the freezing cold of the nebula. On the bridge of the UES Retribution, Admiral Chen stared at a screen filled with static. "We found it, General. It's huge. If that thing reaches Sol, it's over." "How many ships are guarding it?" Miller asked. "The entire Krell Grand Armada. 50,000 vessels. We have 300. "Imathic." Miller didn't flinch. "Good. Then they can't miss us. Tell the fleet to initiate Project Ghost." The human ships did something strange. They didn't charge in with engines roaring. Instead, they shut down everything. Every light, every heater, even the life support was turned to a minimum. The black, boxy ships drifted into the nebula like pieces of space junk. The Krell sensors saw nothing but cold rocks. "They're gone," the Krell scout reported. "The human fleet must have retreated." "Cowards," the Emperor spat. "Begin the jump sequence for the Sun Eater." As the massive weapon began to hum with power, it created a massive gravitational pull. That was exactly what Miller was waiting for. "Now!" Miller shouted. The human ships didn't turn on their engines. They used the Sun Eater's own gravity to slingshot themselves forward. Suddenly, 300 black shadows emerged from the dust, moving at incredible speeds. The Krell were caught completely off guard. Their shields were tuned for energy weapons, but the humans weren't firing lasers. "Release the Iron Rain," Chen commanded. The human ships opened their bays and dumped millions of tiny, jagged pieces of ultra-dense depleted uranium into the path of the Krell fleet. At the speeds the ships were moving, these tiny pebbles became as deadly as missiles. They shredded the Krell's delicate sensors, broke their glass viewports, and punctured their fuel lines. It was chaos. The Krell ships began colliding with each other, blinded and panicked. "Focus all fire on the Sun Eater's lens," Miller ordered. The UES Retribution led the charge. It took hit after hit from the Krell's heavy cannons. Metal plates flew off the ship, and fires broke out on every deck. But the flying brick kept coming. "General, our front armor is at 10%, an officer yelled. "Keep going," Miller roared. "We didn't come here to survive. We came here to finish this." Just as the Sun Eater's lens began to glow with the light of a dying star, the Retribution fired its main weapon. It wasn't a railgun slug this time. It was a nuclear compressed plasma core. The blue beam hit the Sun Eater's lens just as it was about to fire. The result was a blinding flash that turned the dark nebula into a second sun. The backfire was immense. The Sun Eater didn't just explode. It imploded, pulling the surrounding Krell armada into a crushing vortex of dark energy. On the bridge of the Retribution, Miller was thrown to the floor as the ship groaned under the pressure. When the light finally faded, the Sun Eater was gone. Half of the Krell Grand Armada was gone, and the UES Retribution was drifting, its engines dead and its hull glowing red from the heat. "Status?" Miller asked, coughing through the smoke. "Engines are dark, sir," Chen said, her face covered in blood. "But we're still breathing. And the Krell? They're retreating. They're actually running away." Miller looked out the cracked viewport. The Krell were jumping into hyperspace in total terror. They had lost their god weapon to a fleet of bricks. But then, a new set of signatures appeared on the radar. Elegant, blue-glowing ships. The Alarians. "They're here to help us, aren't they?" Chen whispered bitterly. "No," Miller said, watching the Alarian fleet surround his broken ship. "They're here to clean up the competition." The Alarian High Archon's voice came over the radio, cold and beautiful. "General Miller, you have done the galaxy a great service by destroying the Krell, but you are too dangerous to be left alive. For the sake of peace, Earth must be dismantled." Miller leaned back and smiled. "You Alarians really don't learn, do you? You think this was our only fleet?" Suddenly, the space behind the Alarians began to ripple. Thousands, not hundreds, but thousands of warp signatures appeared. Earth hadn't just sent Miller, they had sent everyone. The Alarian High Archon, Valerius, sat in his velvet-lined command chair, watching the crippled UES Retribution drift. "Target their life support," he commanded calmly. "Let them freeze in the dark. It's more poetic that way." But before his weapons could lock on, his tactical officer screamed, "Archon! Massive warp signatures! Behind us! Above us! Everywhere!" The space around the Onyx Nebula didn't just ripple. It tore open. Thousands of ships exited hyperspace. But these weren't the polished black warships of the initial fleet. There were modified mining haulers with railguns welded to their hulls. There were luxury cruise liners covered in reactive armor plates. There were tiny, one-man scouting vessels, and massive fuel tankers converted into firebombers. It was the Terran civilian fleet. "What is this?" Valerius gasped, his four eyes wide with horror. "Are those cargo ships? Why are they attacking a galactic hegemony with freighters?" Over the open comms, 1,000 different voices broke out. "This is the Grand Trucker from the Australian sector. We heard you guys needed a hand. Beijing Heavy Industry Fleet reporting. We've got 500 drones ready to swarm. New York Volunteer Wing here. Sorry we're late. Traffic was a nightmare." General Miller, still on the floor of his smoking bridge, grabbed the radio. A bloody smile crossed his face. "Valerius, you forgot something about humans. We don't like being told what to do, and we really don't like being stabbed in the back." The Alarian ships were masterpieces of technology. Their shields were like shimmering bubbles of light. But the human mobilization didn't care about technology. They used saturation tactics. Millions of drones, missiles, and even literal junk were launched at the Alarian fleet. The Alarian computers were overwhelmed. They were designed to fight 50 high-tech ships, not 10,000 angry boxes, throwing everything including the kitchen sink at them. "Archon, our shields are flickering," the Alarian officer cried. They are ramming us. The humans are literally driving their ships into our hulls." On the view screen, a giant human mining ship, the Deep Core 4, slammed its reinforced drill nose directly into an Alarian cruiser. The Alarian ship, built for elegance and speed, snapped in half like a glass toy. This wasn't a tactical space battle. This was a brawl. "This is madness," Valerius shouted. "You are destroying your own economy, your own people. For what?" "For the right to be left alone," Miller retorted. "Admiral Chen, give the order to the volunteer fleet. Protocol. Crowdsource. Onder. A. Left." Every human ship began to broadcast a high-frequency screamer signal. It was a digital virus designed by Earth's teenage hackers and professional coders over the last 48 hours. It didn't attack the Alarians' engines, it attacked their internal sensors. Suddenly, inside the Alarian ships, the lights began to strobe. The gravity turned off and on. The doors locked and unlocked. The Alarian crews, who were used to comfort and order, fell into a total panic. While the Alarians were distracted by the digital chaos, the human bricks, the real warships, re-engaged their engines. "All ships, focus fire on the Archon's flagship," Miller commanded. "Let's show them that primitive doesn't mean stupid." The UES Retribution, despite being half destroyed, turned its nose toward the Starlight Symphony. With one final, massive surge of power, it fired its remaining railguns. The Alarian flagship's shields, already weakened by the swarm of civilian ships, finally shattered. The tungsten slugs tore through the beautiful silk-lined halls, the meditation chambers, and finally, the bridge. Valerius watched as a piece of human metal, stamped with the words, "Made in Detroit," smashed through his command console. The Alarian fleet, seeing their leader's ship leaning and burning, did something they hadn't done in 1,000 years. They broke formation. They fled. But the humans didn't chase them. Not yet. General Miller stood up, leaning on Admiral Chen for support. He looked at the thousands of human ships, the teachers, the miners, the pilots who had jumped across the stars to save them. "We did it," Chen whispered, tears streaking through the soot on her face. "No," Miller said, looking at the star chart. "We just cleared the path. The Krell are broken. The Alarians are terrified. Now, it's time for the final part of the plan." "Which is?" "We're going to their home worlds," Miller said, "not to burn them, but to make sure they never, ever forget the day they knocked on our door." Krellia was a nightmare planet. It was a world of black iron, toxic clouds, and endless factories. It was guarded by the Ring of Fire, a massive belt of orbital defense platforms that could vaporize a fleet before it even reached the atmosphere. The Krell Emperor sat in his throne room, his claws digging into the stone. "Let them come," he hissed. They defeated our fleet in the nebula, but they cannot break the ring of fire. Every human ship that enters this system will become a funeral pyre. But the humans didn't bring a fleet. Not at first. Instead, a single small ship dropped out of hyperspace. It wasn't a warship. It was a communications relay. It began to broadcast a signal, not to the Emperor, but to the billions of Krell workers in the factories below. The signal was a video. It showed the Krell soldiers being treated by human doctors in captured bases. It showed human food being shared with Krell prisoners. And then, a voice spoke not in English, but in perfect Krell. Your leaders told you we were monsters. They told you we wanted your blood, but we only wanted our peace. Your Emperor spent your lives on a war that has no end. We are here to end it. Destroy that ship, the Emperor screamed. The ring of fire opened fire, and the relay ship vanished in a puff of light. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted. Then, the sky began to scream. The human fleet arrived. But they didn't attack the defense platforms. They used a tactic the Krell had never seen. The gravity anchor. 4 massive Excalibur warships moved to the north and south poles of the Krellian moon. They didn't fire guns. Instead, they projected a massive gravitational field that began to pull the Krell's own orbital platforms out of alignment. The ring of fire started to wobble. Platforms began crashing into each other. The Krell's perfect defense was being destroyed by the very laws of physics. Now, Miller commanded from the bridge of his new flagship, the UES Vanguard. Send in the iron paratroopers. From the human ships, thousands of small, heat-shielded pods were launched. They didn't look like landing craft. They looked like meteorites. They hit the atmosphere at terrifying speeds, glowing bright orange. Inside those pods were the Terran shock troopers. These were men and women trained for high-gravity combat. When the pods slammed into the streets of Krellia's capital, the doors didn't just open, they exploded. The Krell guards, armed with high-tech lasers, waited for the humans to come out. But the humans didn't walk out. They came out in exosuits, 3-meter-tall steel monsters, equipped with heavy machine guns and hydraulic fists, stepped out of the smoke. The Krell lasers bounced off their thick plating. They aren't soldiers, a Krell guard cried as he fled. They are walking tanks. The battle for Krellia wasn't fought in the sky. It was fought in the mud, the factories, and the narrow alleys of the iron cities. The humans used breaching tactics, blowing through walls instead of using doors. They moved with a rhythmic, brutal efficiency that the Krell, who were used to fighting with drones, couldn't handle. General Miller landed his shuttle in the middle of the Emperor's palace gardens. He stepped out, carrying nothing but a small tablet. He was met by the Krell elite guard, but they didn't fire. They looked at the massive exosuit standing behind Miller and slowly lowered their weapons. Miller walked into the throne room. The Emperor stood there, trembling. You have conquered us, the Emperor spat. Go ahead, kill me, burn the city. That is what winners do. Miller looked around the room. He saw the gold, the blood-stained banners, and the maps of a galaxy the Krell had tried to swallow. That's the difference between us, Miller said, sliding the tablet across the floor. We don't want your throne. We want your signature. The Emperor looked at the tablet. It wasn't a surrender document. It was a trade and peace treaty. You aren't going to occupy us? The Emperor asked, stunned. We have our own planet to take care of, Miller replied. But from today your military is dismantled. Your Sun-Eaters are illegal, and you will pay for the reconstruction of every world you burned. If you agree, we leave. If you don't, Miller pointed to the sky, where the human fleet sat like a heavy cloud. Then we stay. The Emperor looked at his broken city, then at the man in the dusty green uniform. He realized that the humans were the most terrifying thing in the galaxy, not because they could kill, but because they could forgive after winning. The Emperor signed, but as Miller walked back to his shuttle, Admiral Chen's voice crackled over his radio. General, we have a problem. The Alarians. They've seen the treaty. They realize that a human Krell peace means they are no longer the most powerful force in the galaxy. And, Miller asked, they've activated the final protocol. They are going to collapse the hyperspace lanes. They're going to trap us here and isolate Earth forever. Miller tightened his grip on his tablet. They really want to play the long game. Fine. Tell the fleet to prepare for one last jump. We're going to the Alarian homeworld. It's time to close the book on this war. The Alarian homeworld, Ethelgard, was a planet of crystal spires and floating gardens. It was beautiful, serene, and built on the lies of 1,000 years. The Alarians didn't fight with iron. They fought with control. By activating the final protocol, they intended to trigger a gravitational collapse in the hyperspace lanes, effectively putting the entire galaxy into quarantine. Earth would be cut off, the Krell would be isolated, and the Alarians would remain the only ones with the keys to the door. On the bridge of the UES Vanguard, the air was thick with tension. The collapse has started, Admiral Chen reported, her hands flying across the holographic terminal. If we don't stop the Alarian Great Beacon in the next 20 minutes, we'll be trapped in this sector for 1,000 years. We won't be able to get home. General Miller looked at the blue-tinted world of Ethelgard on his screen. And if we destroy the beacon, the feedback loop will shatter their planetary power grid, Chen said quietly. Ethelgard will go dark. Their floating cities will fall. Millions could die. They are betting that we are too human to pull the trigger. 1. The Alarian High Archon's face appeared on the main screen. He looked calm, almost bored. General Miller, Valeria said, you have played your part well. You destroyed the Krell, a task we found tedious. But now, the play is over. Go back to your little blue planet. Be the kings of your empty corner. In 1,000 years, perhaps we will let you out again. You'd trap billions of people in isolation just to stay in power? Miller asked. Power is the only thing that keeps the galaxy from chaos, Valerius replied. We are the gardeners. You are just the weeds. Miller turned to his crew. Every one of them was a volunteer. They were tired, they were scarred, and they wanted to go home. Admiral, Miller said, load the sledgehammer. The Vanguard didn't move toward the planet. It moved toward the beacon, a massive crystalline structure orbiting Ethelgard. The Alarian fleet, what was left of it, formed a desperate wall of light between the human ship and the beacon. They're firing everything they have, Chen shouted. Shields are at 40%, 20%, 10%. The human bricks were being torn apart. But then, something unexpected happened. The Krell ships, the very ones Miller had defeated days ago, emerged from hyperspace. They didn't attack the humans. They moved in front of the Vanguard, using their heavy iron hulls to soak up the Alarian fire. The Krell? Chen gasped. Why? Over the radio, the Krell High Priest's voice crackled. The humans gave us a treaty. The Alarians gave us a cage. Today, we choose the treaty. With the Krell acting as a shield, the Vanguard reached the optimal firing range. Miller looked at the sledgehammer, a massive kinetic slug infused with antimatter. One shot would end the beacon, but it would also devastate the world below. Miller's finger hovered over the red button. He thought of Earth. He thought of the quiet Tuesday mornings, the coffee shops, and the children who didn't know their world was almost erased. Then, he did something no one expected. He didn't press the button. Admiral, Miller said, target the beacon's frequency transmitter, not the core, and send the open source packet. Sir, if we don't destroy it, the collapse continues. Just do it, Miller ordered. The human ship fired a precise, low-energy pulse. It didn't blow up the beacon. Instead, it hacked it. Suddenly, the Alarian beacon began to broadcast. But it wasn't broadcasting a collapse signal. It was broadcasting the truth. Every secret meeting, every Alarian lie, every backroom deal they had made to keep the Krell and other species at war was streamed to every screen in the galaxy. The Alarian people, who had lived in peaceful ignorance, saw what their leaders had done in their name. The Alarian fleet stopped firing. The soldiers on the ships looked at their screens in horror. The final protocol wasn't a defense, it was a prison. Inside the Alarian palace, a revolution started in minutes. The people, led by their own scientists who were tired of the lies, stormed the great beacon's control room and shut it down from the inside. The hyperspace lanes stabilized. The Great Silence was officially over. 1 year later, Earth was no longer a secret. It was now the diplomatic capital of the galaxy. General Miller stood on his porch in a small town in Pakistan, looking up at the night sky. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He was wearing an old sweater and holding a cup of tea. Beside him sat a Krell ambassador, a tall, imposing figure who was currently struggling to eat a piece of gulab jamun. It is very sweet, the Krell said. his voice deep. That's the point. Miller smiled. In the distance, a shuttle took off, heading for the moon base. Human, Krell, and Alarian engineers were working together now, building a new kind of ship. Not a brick, not a bird of prey, but something meant for exploration. The galaxy had changed. The humans hadn't conquered it with fire. They had conquered it by being the only ones brave enough to stay out of the war, and the only ones strong enough to end it. The enemy had knocked on Earth's door, and in doing so, they had accidentally invited humanity to lead the way to the stars. Miller looked at the stars and took a sip of his tea. For the first time in 300 years, the galaxy was finally, truly, quiet.